The sun was just beginning to rise over the sleepy town of Millfield, casting a soft golden hue over the neatly trimmed lawns and empty sidewalks. The park, nestled between two quiet streets, slowly began to wake up with the chirping of birds and the distant bark of a dog. Jack Reynolds moved slowly down the concrete path, each step measured and deliberate. His right leg, stiff from a shrapnel wound years ago, carried the weight of more than just his body. Beside him, padded footsteps moved in sync. A large German shepherd, wearing a vest that read, "Service Dog, Do Not Pet." The dog, Shadow, was alert but calm, his eyes constantly scanning the environment, as if he knew the burden his partner carried inside. Jack glanced down and offered a soft word. "You're doing good, boy," he murmured, giving Shadow a scratch behind the ear. They made their way to Jack's usual bench by the fountain, an old stone structure that gurgled softly, its sound one of the few things that helped quiet the noise in his head. Jack sat slowly, the weight of his body easing onto the cold bench. He exhaled through his nose and closed his eyes for a moment, just listening. Shadow sat at his feet, eyes forward, tail still. A jogger passed by, nodding politely. A woman walking her beagle crossed the street when she saw Shadow, perhaps unsure of what the vest meant. Jack didn't take it personally. He rarely did anymore. Most people didn't understand PTSD. They didn't see the tremors that crept into his hands at night. They didn't hear the screams that still echoed in his sleep. But Shadow understood. Jack reached into his backpack and pulled out a collapsible water bowl and a bottle of water. He poured it carefully and placed it down. Shadow didn't move until Jack gave a soft command. "Drink." A small boy on a scooter slowed as he passed. His eyes lit up when he saw Shadow. "Is he a police dog?" the boy asked, stopping a few feet away. Jack smiled. "He's a Marine, just like me." The boy's mother caught up a moment later. "Come on, honey, let's not bother him." Jack shook his head gently. "It's all right." He looked down at Shadow. "You can pet him for a second if you want. Just be gentle." The boy reached out slowly, and Shadow stayed perfectly still as small fingers brushed his fur. The boy giggled. "He's soft." Jack smiled again. "He's the best there is." The mother gave Jack a quick thank you and a soft smile before ushering her son along. For a few peaceful moments, Jack let his mind drift. He thought of his unit, Echo Company, 2nd Battalion, and the men who didn't come home. He thought of Afghanistan, of heat, sand, and the thud of rotors overhead. He remembered the day he met Shadow, back at Walter Reed, 2 weeks after the nightmares started. They'd told him Shadow had been trained to detect anxiety spikes, nightmares, flashbacks, even heart rate changes. At first, Jack didn't believe a dog could do all that. But one night, when his body broke into a cold sweat and he couldn't breathe, Shadow jumped on the bed, placed his head on Jack's chest, and didn't move until the panic subsided. Since then, they'd been inseparable. The park around him began to stir. A groundskeeper raked fallen leaves near the north path. A few more joggers passed by. Jack stayed still, letting the wind pass over him. He looked down at Shadow, who looked up at him as if to say, "You okay?" "I'm good," Jack said softly. "Better now." Then he saw something shift near the park's entrance. A police cruiser rolled to a stop, engine still running. A young officer stepped out, lean, tightly wound, eyes scanning sharply. He adjusted his belt and began walking toward the bench. Jack instinctively sat a little straighter. Shadow let out a low breath, sensing the change in posture. "Morning," Jack offered casually. The officer didn't respond immediately. He looked down at Shadow, then at Jack. "Dogs aren't allowed off-leash in the park," he said flatly. Jack nodded, gesturing to the thick black leash in his hand and the vest Shadow wore. "He's leashed, and he's a certified service dog." The officer's brows pulled together. "Still, I need to see proof of that." Jack didn't flinch. He reached slowly into his jacket and pulled out a laminated card. Service animal. ID, VA certification, even a doctor's letter. The officer glanced at it briefly. "I'm going to need to call this in." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Call what in?" "I'm sitting on a bench with my service dog." The officer stepped back slightly and reached for his radio. Shadow tensed. Jack's grip on the leash tightened subtly. "Everything all right?" Jack asked, his tone calm but firm. The officer didn't answer. Jack's chest tightened. Something about the way the man looked at him, like a problem to be handled, not a citizen to be protected, made his muscles lock up. He didn't know it yet, but the piece of his morning was already over. Officer Darren Mills kept one hand resting on his belt as his other hovered over the mic clipped to his shoulder. The early morning calm of Millfield Park seemed almost too quiet now, a stillness that didn't fit the way his pulse had suddenly quickened. Jack sat still, one hand on Shadow's leash, the other resting casually on his knee. His military training didn't let him show discomfort, but inside, his senses were alert. "You said he's a service dog," Mills said, his voice clipped. "But I've had people lie about that before." Jack tilted his head slightly. "I gave you the VA paperwork. You can scan the ID number right there. Everything's registered federally." Mills didn't scan it. He just stared. Shadow hadn't moved. His eyes were locked on Mills now, quiet but alert, trained to spot sudden movement, tension, stress. "You got any weapons on you?" Mills asked suddenly. Jack's eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me?" "I asked if you're armed." "No," Jack said calmly. "Not that it's your business unless I'm being detained." That word, detained, seemed to push Mills a step further. His jaw clenched. "I'm asking you a lawful question. I need to ensure I'm safe." Jack held back a scoff. "You're the one with the taser, the cuffs, and a sidearm. I'm sitting on a bench with my dog." A jogger slowed as they passed, eyeing the interaction. A woman stopped on the other path, pretending to tie her shoe but clearly watching. "Look," Jack said evenly, "I don't want trouble. I came here to walk my dog, get some air. You're escalating this for no reason." Mills took a half step forward. Shadow immediately stood, body tense but silent. "Control your animal," Mills snapped. "He's controlled. You're the one acting hostile." Mills's radio crackled faintly. Jack could see the man's fingers twitch near his taser. A familiar heat began to creep up Jack's spine. Not fear, but adrenaline. The same kind he'd felt just before things went bad overseas. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Mills said, raising his voice. "Stand up and step away from the dog." Jack blinked. "On what grounds?" "You're making me feel threatened." There was a pause. Jack stared at him. "You're threatened," Jack said slowly, "by a guy sitting on a bench with a limp and a leashed service dog?" Mills took another step. Shadow growled. Not loud, just enough. The officer reached for his taser. "Hey, hey!" someone shouted. It was the woman who had been tying her shoe. "What are you doing? He's not doing anything." Mills didn't even look her way. In one motion, he drew the taser. Shadow barked loudly. Jack stood, not aggressively, just rising in an instinctive move to calm his dog. But Mills saw it differently. The taser fired. A high-pitched pop broke the air. Jack jolted, his body locking up, falling sideways as the electric current surged through him. He hit the pavement hard, his head narrowly missing the edge of the bench. Shadow barked furiously now, but did not attack, just circled Jack's body, nudging him, whining, trained to comfort, to shield. "Oh my God!" the woman screamed. "He's a veteran! That's a service dog! Are you out of your mind?" Phones were out. People were filming. A man in a baseball cap with a faded Marine Corps emblem stood, still for a moment, stunned, before storming forward. "You just tased a Marine," he said, voice shaking. "You just tased a goddamn Marine." Mills was already backing up, realizing now, too late, that something had gone wrong. I thought he was aggressive," he stammered. "The dog was growling." The Marine vet shook his head. "You think a man with a limp, a dog wearing a service vest and PTSD paperwork in hand is aggressive? You're about to find out what aggressive really means." Another man knelt beside Jack, who was trying to move, his limbs twitching from the aftershocks. Shadow licked his face, nudging him, whining desperately. "It's okay, boy," Jack whispered hoarsely. "I'm okay." But he wasn't okay. The shaking wasn't just from the taser. It was the overload, the sensory flood, the flashing lights, the adrenaline screaming through his nervous system. It was the war coming back, not in Afghanistan this time, but in his hometown. An ambulance was called. One woman dialed the local news station while still filming, and in the background, a teenager uploaded the footage to TikTok with the caption, "Cop just tased a disabled vet with his service dog. Someone better fix this." Within 90 seconds, it had over 12,000 views. Within 3 minutes, it reached the inbox of a retired Marine who now ran a mechanic shop 2 blocks away. And within 5 minutes, engines were revving. The Marines were coming. The sound came first, a deep, rumbling growl that seemed to rise from the pavement itself. Then headlights appeared on the far end of the street, flaring like signals in the early morning haze. 4 matte black trucks rolled down Main Street, in formation, wide, low to the ground, all built like they belonged more on a battlefield than a suburban road. Their tires chewed up the silence, engine noise rising like an anthem. The first vehicle bore a silver decal. Echo 2, Marines never leave a man behind. Inside sat Gunnery Sergeant Cole Maddox, Retmers, Jack's former commanding officer and longtime friend. He had just finished changing oil in a neighbor's car when the video hit his phone. He didn't hesitate. He sent a single text. "Jack's down, gear up." Now, less than 5 minutes later, he stepped out of the lead truck and surveyed the scene. People were everywhere. Joggers, parents with strollers, park-goers, all frozen in place as the convoy lined the block. Phones were out. Some were recording. Others were simply stunned. At the center of it all lay Jack, now seated on the curb, leaning heavily against the woman who'd screamed earlier. A paramedic knelt beside him, checking his vitals. Shadow lay tight against his side like a guardian angel. Officer Mills stood about 10 feet away, talking into his radio with frantic eyes and a cracked voice. But the radio couldn't help him now. Cole approached like a storm in boots. His face was carved from granite, his voice cold and calm. "What the hell happened here?" Mills turned, visibly paling. "This is an active investigation." "Not anymore," Cole interrupted. "You assaulted a disabled veteran in public with witnesses while he was seated with a registered service dog. I thought he was a threat. He's got a VA certification, a service vest, a limp, and PTSD. You think that's a threat?" Mills fumbled for words. The dog growled. "He's trained to do that when his partner's in danger, and right now, everyone sees who the danger was." From behind Cole, more Marines stepped out of the trucks. 8 men, all in civilian clothes, but their posture told the real story. These weren't retirees who left the fight behind. These were brothers, fighters, guardians. A crowd began, forming around them, murmurs spreading like wildfire. "Did you see what the cop did to the vet? He tased him while he was sitting down." And the dog never even attacked, just protected him. A news van screeched around the corner, coming to a halt near the sidewalk. The local anchor jumped out, cameraman already filming. Cole turned to them. "You filming?" he asked. "Live," the cameraman replied. "Been broadcasting for 2 minutes." "Good," Cole said. "Then let's make this official." He turned back toward the officer. "Name?" he asked. "Officer Darren Mills." "Badge number?" Mills hesitated. "Say it," Cole snapped. 6215. Mills mumbled. Cole looked into the camera. "Officer Darren Mills of the Millfield Police Department just tased a disabled Marine veteran, unprovoked, while he sat on a public bench with his registered service dog. We are calling for his immediate suspension and for the department to issue a public apology." The reporter leaned in. "And who are you?" Gunnery Sergeant Cole Maddox, United States Marine Corps, retired. "This man he assaulted, Jack Reynolds, served under me. Silver Star recipient. 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came home with a bad leg and worse memories." He turned slightly, pointing to Jack, who now looked up, his eyes locking with Cole's. This man gave everything for this country. And today, he was treated like a criminal by someone who didn't bother to look past the leash. The crowd began clapping. A few people shouted, "Semper Fi." One elderly woman stood with tears in her eyes. Mills tried to retreat, but 2 of the Marines calmly stepped between him and the squad car. "We're not touching you," one said. "We're just making sure you don't run from what you did." Another police cruiser arrived, then another. But the moment had already flipped. Body cams were rolling. Civilians were filming. The story was live. A sergeant from the department emerged from the second car. He looked around, quickly absorbing the chaos. The veteran, the medics, the crowd, the Marines, the cameras. And then he locked eyes with Mills. "Darren," he said flatly, "hand me your badge and your weapon." "What?" "Sarge, you tased a disabled vet. We got it from 6 angles. You're done." The crowd gasped. Mills stared, his mouth opening and closing. "But I felt threatened." "You should have felt compassionate," the sergeant said coldly. Slowly, Mills handed over his badge and sidearm. The sergeant turned to Jack. "Sir, on behalf of the department, I'm sorry. This should have never happened." Jack looked up, voice raspy but steady. "It's not me you need to apologize to," he said, placing a hand on Shadow's head. "It's him!" The dog's tail thumped weakly. Cole stepped forward again. "This isn't just about one officer. This is about what happens when the people who should be protecting us treat our veterans like threats. That stops today." And just like that, the crowd erupted. Not in anger, but applause. Long, rolling, thunderous. Jack nodded once as Cole knelt beside him, clasping his shoulder. "You good, Marine?" "I am now," Jack said softly. "You came, always." The sun had fully risen over Millfield by the time the final truck in the Marine convoy came to a stop, completing the perimeter. A full square of steel and loyalty now surrounded the intersection near the park, and the energy had shifted completely. No one came in. No one got out. Not until this was made right. Jack sat under a makeshift shade the medics had erected, sipping water slowly, his fingers lightly stroking Shadow's fur. The dog never left his side, pressed close to him, sensing every shift in Jack's breathing. He wasn't just guarding anymore, he was grounding him. Cole stood a few feet away, arms folded, scanning every vehicle that approached. He'd already taken 2 calls, one from a local veterans organization and another from a regional VA director who had already seen the live stream. But then a third call came through. Private, unknown number. Cole hesitated, then answered. "This is Maddox." A deep, firm voice responded. "This is Lieutenant General Price, Marine Corps retired. I just saw the footage. That man you're standing next to, he served under my nephew." "Yes, sir." He's stable, shaken, but standing. "You're doing the right thing, son. Keep that block closed. Don't let them make this quiet." "Yes, sir." As Cole hung up, a crowd of onlookers had grown into nearly 100 people. Some had brought lawn chairs. Others arrived with donuts, water, and Gatorade for the Marines. It had transformed from a flashpoint to a full-blown stand of solidarity. Across the street, Officer Mills was now sitting in the back of a squad car, his head buried in his hands. His badge and sidearm had been taken. The moment he lost control of the narrative, everything unraveled. But the blockade? That was the story now. A retired Army nurse stood on a crate holding a hand-painted sign. "He served us. Now we stand for him." The news vans had doubled. Drones hovered above. Inside the park, Jack watched the crowd with a growing mix of disbelief and gratitude. A medic leaned over. "You okay, sir?" He nodded slowly. "I didn't ask for this. You didn't have to. That's what brotherhood looks like." Suddenly, a large black SUV turned the corner and approached the outer perimeter. 2 Marines at the roadblock approached it cautiously until they saw the license plate. Government. The back door opened. A tall woman in a gray suit stepped out, heels clicking on the pavement with authority. She adjusted her blazer, pushed her sunglasses into her hair, and approached the center of the blockade. "Which one of you is Gunnery Sergeant Maddox?" Cole stepped forward. "That's me." She extended a hand. "Deputy Director Elise Monroe, Department of Veterans Affairs. DC sent me this morning. My phone has exploded with media alerts, and your live stream has reached over 14 million views in 3 hours. Cole took her hand firmly. "Appreciate you coming." "Not just coming," she said. "Fixing." She turned to Jack, kneeling so they were eye level. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm sorry. Deeply. This wasn't just an overreach. This was a failure. Of empathy, of policy, of respect. But it's not going unnoticed." Jack said nothing, just nodded, his hand still on Shadow's head. Monroe stood and looked to the news cameras. We're launching a federal investigation into the incident. Officer Mills is being suspended without pay pending misconduct proceedings. In addition, the city has agreed to cover all of Mr. Reynolds' medical expenses, past and future, related to his military service, effective immediately. There were gasps in the crowd. Phones rose again. Someone whispered, "Finally." "But we're not stopping there," Monroe continued, "because this isn't just about one man being mistreated. It's about how we treat all of them." She turned slightly, glancing down the line of Marines who stood like statues around the block. These men didn't wait for red tape. They acted. And because they did, America saw this, loud and clear. Behind her, Jack slowly stood up, supported by a cane one of the medics had brought from his car. His legs trembled a bit, but his eyes were steady now. The fog was lifting. "I didn't come here for a spotlight," he said, his voice carrying farther than expected. "I came to walk my dog and feel normal for a while." He looked at Mills through the window of the squad car. "But I guess normal doesn't apply to people like me anymore." "No, sir," Monroe said, stepping toward him. "From now on, respected applies to people like you." Another round of applause broke out. This time, even the local police who'd just arrived paused, some nodding, some clapping quietly. Cole walked over, steadying Jack with one hand. "You ready to head out?" Jack looked at the crowd. "I think I'm ready to walk through this block with my head high again." And so he did. He walked down the middle of the street with Shadow. Beside him, limping but upright. On either side, civilians, Marines, and fellow veterans saluted, clapped, or stood with hands over their hearts. It wasn't just a walk. It was a statement that this wasn't going to be just another buried moment, that this would live, online, on camera, in memory, because on that day, a Marine got knocked down, and a nation stood up. A week had passed. Main Street was quiet, again, but the echoes of that morning still lingered, on every news station, across millions of phone screens, and most of all, in the hearts of those who had watched a brotherhood move like a rising tide. Jack Reynolds now sat on his front porch, a fresh cup of coffee in hand, Shadow resting peacefully at his feet. The bruises were fading, the limp was still there, but something else had returned, something far more important: peace. He had received over 4,000 messages, letters from strangers, fellow veterans, single mothers, retired cops, even high school students who had never met a vet before, but now wanted to. Some simply said, "Thank you." Others said, "I'm sorry." One, scrawled in a child's handwriting, read, "My dad says you're a hero. I think Shadow is too." Cole had stopped by every day since, sometimes with donuts, sometimes with silence. Jack never minded either. Words weren't always needed between men who had bled together. The city council issued a formal apology. The mayor declared a new initiative, Operation Honor, to train officers in veteran sensitivity and disability response. And Officer Mills? He had resigned quietly, facing civil charges and a department audit. But for Jack, vindication wasn't about punishment. It was about finally being seen. He looked down at Shadow, rubbing the dog's ears. "We did okay, didn't we?" The dog thumped his tail twice, eyes blinking slowly in approval. A car pulled up in front of the house. It was Cole again, this time with something in his hand, a folded American flag, neatly pressed, mounted in a glass case. The inscription read, "For service beyond the battlefield." Jack took it gently, his throat tightening. "No more hiding." "Jack," Cole said softly, "you stood up for yourself, and the country stood with you." Jack nodded, eyes glistening. "Feels like home again, because sometimes justice doesn't come in a courtroom. It comes when the people say, 'Enough is enough,' and stand up for the ones who stood for them. If a man who fought for our freedom can't walk his service dog without fear, then what kind of country are we becoming? Tell me, would you have stayed silent? If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. More real, powerful moments like this await you every day.